Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Women of Color and Their Personal Products, Knowing What is in Your Beauty Routine. My name is Dominique, and I'm the Outreach Manager here at SHARE. A quick note before the presentation begins. I would like to tell you a little bit more about SHARE. We are a national non-for-profit that we support, we educate, and we empower anyone who has been diagnosed with women's cancers. We also provide outreach to the general public about signs and symptoms. No one should have to face breast, ovarian, uterine, cervical, or metastatic cancer alone. For more information about upcoming webinars, support groups, and our helplines, please visit us at sharecancersupport.org. Just an important thing to note also that all participants during this presentation will be muted. When Dr. McDonald is finished, we will begin a Q&A session. You will then be welcome to give comments, questions, but if you do have a specific question, we ask that you submit it specifically through the Q&A button that you will see most likely at the bottom of your screen. If you're on your phone, you may have to hit the menu button, and then you will see the Q&A option pop up there. Just keep in mind when asking questions, Dr. McDonald is unable to give specific medical advice, so please we ask that you keep your questions general in nature. I also want to mention that closed captioning is available, and you can enable this feature by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and selecting the subtitle option. The webinar is also being recorded and will be available on the SHARE website soon. So now that all the housekeeping is finished, I would like to introduce our guest. Dr. McDonald is an assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Mailman School of Public Health. She holds a doctorate in biological sciences and public health from Harvard University and has postdoctoral training in breast cancer epidemiology from the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University. She is a molecular epidemiologist whose research program provides unique perspectives and novel study designs to examine the complexities of breast cancer etiology and risk reduction across the life course. She is actively engaged with the community from a research and educational perspective on the harmful role of endocrine disruptor chemicals within personal care products. I didn't want to say it too fast because I want everyone to understand how important that is. As an avid teacher and mentor, Dr. McDonald teaches cancer epidemiology within Mailman, is an assistant director of cancer education at the Herbert Irving Comprehensive Cancer Center and is co-director of the Yes in the Heights youth program at the same center, which is by Columbia University. Now, without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Jasmine McDonald. Thank you, Dr. McDonald.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be here. I want to jump right in. I want to say, first and foremost, thank you for all of those who are sharing your time with me today. You can be doing many other things, so I want to just thank you for being attentive. And please, any questions, comments, or concerns you have, I'm happy to answer them at the end of the talk. So to begin, our agenda is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about why we're here. Why are you attending this session today? Then we're going to move into our hair, our health, and then we're going to have a chat. So why are you here today? Well, you're here because we are all women, and many of you probably identify as a woman of color. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about why my journey brings me here today. So I study breast cancer, and I knew all of the risk factors for developing breast cancer, but it really didn't hit home until I was pregnant. And I knew that during my pregnancy, I needed to eat healthy, take care of myself for my baby. I knew I had to watch what I did to my hair, can't like perm your hair, can't dye your hair because of my baby. But after my baby was born, I started realizing that there are risk factors by just me giving birth. So every birth that a woman has, there's this period of time where she has an increased risk of developing breast cancer. And women who are diagnosed within peak 5 years is where your risk is the highest. Who are diagnosed within that time frame are diagnosed with postpartum breast cancer. And these breast cancers are more aggressive, they're harder to treat, they're more often leading to greater mortality. And I knew as an older mom, my risk was going to be even higher. And so I was trying to find ways of decreasing my exogenous exposures, so my environmental exposures, such that I can protect my health. Yes, I wanted to protect my baby's health, but I also wanted to be protecting my health. And so when I started researching, one of the things that I ran into is that, there is an inequitable amount of exposures that women of color are exposed to. And I loved my hair when I was pregnant, but after I had my baby, all of those hormones made my hair look kind of wonky. And so I was starting to look for products that were safe because I wanted to limit the amount of harmful chemicals that I was putting directly on my scalp. And so that's kind of what brought me to, how do I do that? Like, there wasn't a lot of information out there for how do I reduce my exposure to these environmental carcinogens, especially through my personal care products, when pretty much all of these marketing tools are telling me to buy. It's for natural hair, it's for this, it's that, it's that. How do I know? How do I determine what's safe for me? And that also brought me to understanding the importance of environmental exposures across of the life course, because I also started thinking about what I was going to put in my son's hair. I also started thinking about what I put in my hair when I was younger. And so I hope that my journey and my understanding the journey of personal care products and our exposures to them adds to your thinking about you're in a sensitive window too. You are all survivors, and you are in a sensitive window where you don't want exogenous exposures to carcinogens because you are at increased risk for developing a second event. And so I hope that this presentation gives you some information on what you can do for yourself, but also realizing that you're not alone in your journey. So our objective today will be to understand what are these chemicals I'm talking about. And the class of chemicals, we refer to them as EDCs, or endocrine disrupting chemicals. And they are often found in our personal care products. I want us to understand the long-term health benefits of limiting our exposures to EDCs, but also to be able to identify various types of EDCs and how we can reduce our exposures to them in our everyday routines. So let's jump right into the science. As a molecular epidemiologist, for me, I like to understand the mechanism. I want to know, how does something that is outside of me affect inside of me? And so endocrine disruptor chemicals are within personal care products. And just as the name describes, endocrine refers to hormones. Our endocrine system is our hormonal system. We have natural hormones that are regulated within our body, but endocrine disruptor chemicals are exogenous hormones that can interfere with our natural hormone production, which could lead to hormone-related health issues. This can be in the span of changes in menstrual cycle characteristics, such as EDCs, or endocrine disruptor chemicals, have been shown to be associated with earlier age at a girl's period. They've been associated with breast cancer risk, uterine fibroids, endometriosis, and so much more. Now, overall, these endocrine disruptor chemicals are in a vast array of personal products, from cosmetics to feminine care to deodorants, etc. I'm going to give hair care or hair products as an example throughout the presentation, but do realize that all of these chemicals that I'm talking about are readily dosed by your personal care routine. And so we're not thinking like, oh, well, I only use like 1 or 2 products in my hair a day. We're talking about your personal care routine through your deodorant use, your facial cream, your hair routine, your lotioning of your body, and everything else that you use to take care and apply and keep on your body. Now, some examples of EDCs include estrogens, phthalates, and parabens. And these things are not put in products to give you harm. They're put in the products to make the products more desirable. Estrogens are added to promote hair growth. Phthalates are added to make the product smell good. And parabens are added to prolong the shelf life of the product. Now, all of these things have downstream mechanisms that are associated with carcinogenesis. For example, estrogens have been associated with changing the way our DNA is read. We call this epigenetic changes, and this can lead to downstream tumor-inducing activity. Estrogens can also alter the mammary gland development as our breast tissue is ruled and regulated also by hormones. And it also can increase cell proliferation. So cell proliferation, like, well, why is that important? Well, the faster your cells divide, every time they divide, there's opportunities for that DNA that's read to be read incorrectly. But we have amazing systems in place to correct any incorrections. However, with high division, you can imagine that catching those mistakes become more challenging. So we don't want to have a lot of things that are exogenous to us being exposed to us when we have this high period of cell proliferation, because we don't want too many errors that have to be checked, because some may be missed, and those missed errors may be tumor-inducing. And some of the similar mechanisms have been found for phthalates as well as parabens. And particularly parabens have been shown to increase the migratory, the ability of breast cells to move, and invasive properties of breast cancer cells. So these are some of the common EDCs, estrogens, phthalates, and parabens, but the class is vast. It also includes a lot of names that are hard to pronounce, but collectively, the EDCs are added to personal care products to enhance the product. And let's take a deeper look at one of them as just an example, and we'll call this the phthalates. So the phthalates are added to hundreds of products, everything from air fresheners, nail polish, hair care. Just think of them as, what is that scent you smell? It's likely a phthalate. And they're also added to make the hair care products more flexible and stable to avoid the stiffness of hair. So how are we exposed to these phthalates? Well, if you imagine any product that you're applying to your scalp is going to be directly absorbed into your skin. But also, if you are spraying any type of aerosol onto your hair, you are going to be inhaling that, and that's going to give exposure directly into your bloodstream. You also may be applying different cosmetics to your lips, and that may also cause you to ingest, which also gets into your bloodstream. Now, all of these products that I'm saying, the evidence isn't like, I'm an epidemiologist, so I cannot say that you using lipstick causes XYZ. That's not what we're saying. But the idea is that these products are not just used in silo. The phthalates that you're using are present not just in your hair care, like I mentioned, they're present in all of these personal care products that you're using. And it's not just phthalates, it's parabens, it's different other EDCs. And what we're trying to understand is, what is the evidence suggesting collectively? Let's not just look at phthalates alone. Let's not just look at, parabens alone. What is the literature saying collectively for populations and animal studies? And that's how we understand, is this truly a health concern? And so what we have looked at through all the studies, it indicates that there is a positive association between the personal care products we use and female reproductive health. Now, much of the evidence supports that the chemicals that are in these products is what's driving this health-related activity. And when we think about the health-related activity for women of African descent, we are inequitably exposed to these chemicals based on some of the products we use. And I'll go into that from a study that was done by Silent Spring Institute. But I also want to introduce the campaign for safe cosmetics, which I'll give more detail into towards the end. But the campaign for safe cosmetics is driven by the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, which is an organization whose mission is to eliminate breast cancer. And so they are aimed to reducing the risk of these environmental exposures and breast cancer incidence, especially in marginalized populations. And they have a project that they just released, which you are the first to hear about. It's called Black Beauty. And this is just one of their social media formats where they're going to be displaying, where they're showing some of the information that we all need to know. And this is just showing that, the toxic ingredients that we use have been shown to be associated with some of the health effects that are higher incidence among Black women. So, as I mentioned, there are potential harmful effects in our hair products. There was a study done by Silent Spring Institute, which is also mission is to educate the public around environmental chemicals and adverse health effects, especially in populations that are marginalized and inequitably exposed. They looked at 18 hair care products that are across 6 categories that are used by Black women. This included hot oil treatments and chemical relaxers, among others. They then looked at 66 chemicals that they knew were associated with a particular outcome, like asthma, and they also knew they were endocrine disruptor chemicals. They tested these 66 chemicals across the 18 products. And what they found is that 45 out of the 66 chemicals tested were endocrine disruptor chemicals that are directly linked with asthma. Now, they're also linked with other outcomes, but for this particular paper, they were focused on an asthma outcome, which is highly prevalent within the Black community. What was surprising is that even the safer products that we consider, for example, no-lie relaxers that we use on our young females, our younger generation, they found 4 endocrine disruptor chemicals that were prohibited, as in banned, to be used in products by the European Union Cosmetic Directive. Now, that's not surprising, as the European Union Cosmetic Directive has greater restrictions on chemicals that can go in products, whereas the policies that we are abided by within the United States were developed in 1938, and the legislation is 2.5 pages long and hasn't been changed since 1938. So it's vastly unregulated, and this paper really does show that. But the evidence is pretty substantial when it comes to population-based studies. And when I say substantial, I mean it's varied. So while, like I said, we can't say causative, but we can say the preponderance of the evidence suggests an association. And please do not look at all of these papers. What I want you to focus on is that when we study this concept, we study it in the form of personal care product exposures, and we study it as the chemicals that are within the personal care products. So in the green, you can imagine that is exposure. So whether the exposure is being exposed to skin lightening creams or exposed to a particular chemical like UV filters. On the yellow are all of the outcomes that evidence has looked at. This includes the age that a girl starts her period or menarche, breast cancer risk, fibroids, endometriosis, breast cancer specific mortality, and etc. So while there are some inconsistencies, not all studies show a positive association between exposure and adverse health outcome. There is growing appreciation of the impact of these exposures, specifically when the person is exposed during a critical window of development. We call these windows of susceptibility. This is when the exposures may be most impactful to development. Now, when we think of breast cancer specifically, this would be during periods of time of in utero, during puberty, pregnancy, and the postpartum period. But what shouldn't be taken lightly is that when we think about critical windows of risk, it could be different windows for different outcomes. So for cancer survivors, you are in a critical window. So you want to consider what are those exogenous exposures that you are introducing because you yourself are in a critical window. Now, when we talk about breast cancer as an example, as that is my primary expertise, there has been many studies that have been designed, which really makes us confident that there is association between these products and breast cancer risk. So they have been in the form of two different study designs. One is called a case control. And with a case control study, you're actually enrolling women who are diagnosed with cancer. They have had cancer. And then you ask them, can you remember before you were diagnosed how many relaxers you had, or how often you use hair products, or how frequently you went to the salon? We're asking women to remember. And you can imagine that there's going to be some bias for women recalling their exposure. So we also do prospective study designs. That's when we ask women who have not had a cancer diagnosis. We say, can you tell us your routine? Can you tell us how frequently you get relaxers? Can you tell us how frequently you go to the salon? Can you tell us how frequently you use hair products? And then we follow them to a cancer diagnosis. So both of these types of studies have been done and have decided that there is an association. So I always like to show some data so you understand what we as epidemiologists are seeing and how we're interpreting that to give you health information. So here I have circled here findings for a prospective study design called the Sister Study, which has very low numbers of Black women, but a higher proportion of white women, which we will find in a lot of our cohort studies. But here what they're looking at is beauty classes, which means how frequently are you using products? So this is not just one product, it's the frequent use of products. And what they find here is that those who are moderate users or frequent users have a 10 to 15% higher risk of breast cancer compared to those who are infrequent users. Now, this association was limited to women who are postmenopausal, white women. So these are women who are no longer experiencing their period. In all honesty, the numbers, if you see here, it's only 165 events of cancer incidents for Black women. And this is such a small population. It's really not powered to really examine this question among Black women. However, the Women's Circle of Health study has also looked at this, but they looked at it as different products. So they asked the question about African American women and also looking at European American women and asked about hair dye use. And it was found that the use of dark hair dye was associated with about a 50% increased risk of developing breast cancer. And you can imagine that Black women are more likely to be using darker hair dyes. And studies have suggested that darker hair dyes have more carcinogenic formulations than other hair dye formulations. They also looked at the application style and found that salon application of hair dyes was associated with a 30% increased risk of developing breast cancer. And then they also found that for European American women who use relaxers, they had an increased risk of developing breast cancer. And while here we're not seeing that increased risk for African American women, there has been Ghanaian studies that have confirmed that relaxer use is associated with increased risk for breast cancer. But it's not just the risk of developing breast cancer. A recent study has also shown that the use of these products also impacts your clinical features of the breast cancer you're diagnosed with. So we found in this particular study that a combination of hair relaxer use. So for women who went to the salon and also applied relaxers at home, had a larger tumor size at the time of breast cancer diagnosis. Women who use relaxers for more than 10 years and also began using relaxers before the age of 12 years old also had larger tumor sizes. And a larger tumor size is a worse prognostic feature for a breast cancer diagnosis. So just to summarize this, so when are we vulnerable? Like, when are we vulnerable to these exposures? And I kind of abide by the critical windows of susceptibility. And as I mentioned, this is in utero, childhood, puberty, pregnancy to postpartum, and the peri to postmenopausal window. But this is not just evidence for a chronic disease like cancer. This has also been found for other health effects that are important to cancer risk. So, for example, this is an example of phthalate exposures and how it impacts the fetus or in utero effects. What's important to note on the x-axis is not NBP or NEHP. It's just that these are phthalates. These are endocrine disruptor chemicals. And on the, that's on the y-axis. On the x-axis, we have gestational age. So we have an example of delivering at term and preterm delivery. And what we see in the light gray is that higher amounts of these phthalates result in preterm birth. So what we found is that EDCs impact in utero. Babies are born earlier. They have an elevated weight. They're insulin resistant. There's also been associations with stunted neurodevelopment and autism. There's many studies that have shown that the use of these products in early childhood is associated with starting your period earlier or an earlier age at menses, which is an established risk factor for breast cancer. It's been found that EDCs for pregnant women are associated with preterm birth, retaining weight postpartum, high blood pressure, and other negative health effects. So now that I've sufficiently scared you, and I am sorry, but let me talk about our hair and our health. So what can we do about all this? So I and my colleagues are very adamant about, partnering with the community and engaging with community and advocates to educate and motivate awareness and change around this topic. I've spoken to about this topic locally and nationally at a congressional briefing. And at these sessions, the most often question I get asked is, well, how do I reduce my exposure? Well, first, I want to say that the onus shouldn't be just on you individually. And there are legislations that are being pushed by advocacy groups to introduce bills in Congress to make beauty and personal care products safer for everyone, getting the toxic chemicals out, reducing unsafe exposures for the most vulnerable, making ingredients transparent as an industry standard. Yet we can all have personal agency. But we have to realize that our personal agency, there is this context that the beauty products that we use are used within this environmental injustice system. Now, the environmental injustice of beauty is a framework that was developed by Ami Zoda, who is an associate professor at Columbia University, where she says that the conceptual framework is linking intersectional systems of oppression, like racism, sexism, and classism, to racialized beauty practices that leads to us being unequally chemically exposed, which leads to these adverse health outcomes. And what we propose in this particular article is steps forward. And the preponderance of the evidence suggests that it is time for interventions. It is time to do something. There has been successful interventions such as the Hermosa study that was in California, where they showed that adolescent Latinas could reduce their chemical exposures by switching to cleaner products. We've seen effective interventions such as barbershop studies that have impacted Black men's health. And so we suggest that there are also salon interventions that may be helpful. We developed a pilot project that we termed Let's Roar, or Let's Reclaim Our Ancestral Roots. This was designed for pregnant women of color to have intergenerational impact in reducing exposures for the fetus and the child. As we know that these exposures that we're talking about, there are higher concentrations among marginalized populations, and this does include within the pregnancy and postpartum window. This was a collaborative study with Young Survival Coalition, as well as We Act for Environmental Justice, as well as some key institutions. And for this particular pilot, we focused on phthalates, and I've explained, they're everywhere, they're ubiquitous. But what's really, as a molecular epidemiologist, I want to measure exposures. And phthalates have been found in human breast milk, in urine, and amniotic fluid, and even in placenta. So we know it's pretty ubiquitous and can be able to be cross many different barriers. And so for this intervention, it's the first educational intervention for prenatal women of color, where we did assessments based off of self-report behavioral change, but also measured urinary phthalate concentrations. What I'm going to do is just show you some of the educational intervention slides from that particular intervention, where we talk about some of the ways to identify as well as to how you protect yourself. So first and foremost, how do we even identify these chemicals? Well, using phthalates as an example, if you read the ingredient list on the back of a product, it may say phthalates, but actually you may see a code term for phthalates such as fragrance or parfum, which is just a disguise for the naming of phthalates. The US FDA regulations do not require the listing of the individual fragrance ingredients, and so manufacturers are able to just put parfum. And the reason that they're not legally abided to list what's in parfum or fragrance is because the formulations are proprietary. So if you see any of these ingredients on your product labels, you can choose not to buy it. There's other EDCs that I list here, such as paraben or triclosan. But honestly, these are names that I don't even memorize. And I don't suggest you memorize them. There have been product scanning apps that you can use to assess the safety of a product by simply scanning. There's the Environmental Working Group that is committed to this providing, a compendium of safer products and which products are safe. There's Think Dirty, the Detox Me app, and they all check the ingredients and give you a level of safety for that product. And the aim is to move towards clean beauty. So, what is clean beauty? Well, it refers to products that are created without synthetic chemicals and ingredients that could harm your body or irritate your skin. These are ingredients that we've named like parabens and phthalates and synthetic fragrances, just to name a few. But something else I will say is clean beauty. You'll also see natural ingredients added, but that doesn't necessarily mean that natural doesn't have estrogenic activity like lavender. So it also just kind of err towards fragrance free and just being mindful of how much you're exposing yourself to. Some clean beauty alternative brands that we found are listed here, but there's many out there, and I'm going to give you a resource you can use to find Black-owned brands that are committed to being clean. So once again, we can relearn our habits. We can reduce our own individual exposures. We can limit the products we use every day. We can ask ourselves, do I need to use this product every day? We can check the label. We can go fragrance-free, paraben-free, phthalate-free, get a clean beauty product. We can use apps to identify alternative products, and we can avoid using sprays and aerosols, which end up being inhaled as well as ingested. But this is not an individual mission. And so I want to encourage you by saying that, this is a tough thing to just go into a store and say, I'm going to change my entire beauty regimen. It's expensive. How do you figure it out? What do you do? There should be policies such that what you buy is automatically safe. And so there's a Safer Beauty Bill package by the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, where they've put together 4 bills. And I mentioned them previously in this presentation, but they're all aimed to ban the worst of the chemical exposures, defending the health of women of color and salon workers, making sure that fragrance and fragrance ingredients are not protected and are actually revealed in our labels, and to ensure that the products that your salons are getting, which often don't have ingredients listed on them, actually have transparency for what's in them. And now I will say that for Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, I am on the board. So I'm really committed to their mission for protecting Black women's health, as well as women of color's health broadly. And they have just released the campaign for safe cosmetics, publishes the first ever list of top Black-owned beauty brands and non-toxic product database. So if you go to campaign for safe cosmetics and look at Black beauty, their goals are really to create a list of non-toxic beauty products that are branded and owned by Black brands, to develop and share tip cards and other resources, to grow the Black beauty industry such that it is safer, to raise awareness to the public, but also manufacturers and retailers, as Black women are the highest consumers of hair products among any racial ethnic group. And also to provide you with this red list. And a red list is, what are the ingredients that you really want to steer clear of? This is just an example of the red list of chemicals concerns, where they list the chemical and the product categories that the chemicals are in. They will be releasing a series of different did you knows and providing information on the negative health impact, such as I have here. But I encourage you, if you're trying to find, a Black-owned brand, if you're trying to support minority-owned businesses, and you're trying to find a way to decrease your exposures during a period of time where you are susceptible to a cancer diagnosis, a secondary incidence or recurrence, this is a good site to kind of preview, to hear some of the information that I've said in a different way, but also to share with your circle, such that your circle also has this information to prevent their own cancer risk. So in closing, I will take questions and reflections and hope that this information was applicable to you and your loved ones. And I really thank you for your attention, and I will close slides.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald. That had so much information in it. I was just like, oh my gosh, like, especially about the hair dye, someone who constantly colors her hair. You have me over here thinking. But yes, thank you for all that information. We do have some questions. I'm going to go to the Q&A first. Mrs. Johnson is asking, is it safe to use hair color after a diagnosis? And also, the second part of her question is, and I've also seen this somewhere, is commercially made henna hair color recommended / okay?
Yes, so I would say that no, hair dye, the darker hair dyes in general, they're pretty harsh, and they have been known to have cancer incidence. And so for those who have been diagnosed with cancer, I would suggest that you do not use dark hair dyes, those that are like sold in the stores. Now, when it comes to henna, it's a natural way to dye your hair. I'm not sure of the estrogenic potential for henna, but I would say that you need to make sure you're using henna that doesn't have any other, I'm sorry, I'm having feedback for some reason. You don't want to use henna that maybe have any other exogenous additions. So for example, you don't want to use henna that also has the benefit for creating hair growth, or because that means that you're already using a product that's probably contaminated with endocrine disruptor chemical. So be careful with the henna dyes you use. Just make sure they are particularly, not estrogenic containing. But I don't know of the estrogenic henna, but I can figure that out and get back to share such that it can be available as well.
Okay, great. So we have another question. Since you gave us a lot of good resources and websites, they're asking, can you state those websites again where you can get the information on the products that are better?
Yes. So what I can probably provide is the best place to go, which is this new website. And so I'd love to just take you to that website right now. You can be able to visually see. So this is the Safer Bill Beauty Package is based by the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, but they release within their campaign for safe cosmetics. So if you click here, this will take you to their broad campaign that is for all persons. But this one in particular was targeted for Black beauty. And so here you can actually, see the list. And so this list will take you to those brands that they deemed that were safer and Black owned. Okay. And so this is just some of the brands that they're suggesting that they screened out of hundreds that are Black owned brands that are clean beauty products. You can also search their database. So once again, this is it's not a full committed release to the 18th, but I asked them if I could share this with you so you all can be the first to kind of delve into it. And so this is the non-toxic Black beauty database. So here you can look at particular chemicals. You can check out their health and safety, but it's searchable. So you can learn more about the products that you use. Now, granted, this is Black owned beauty brands. This is meaning that that brand is owned by a Black company and it's not owned by an umbrella company. So you won't see brands here that are, for example, owned by Unilever. You're going to see brands that are owned solely by Black owned companies. And so these products, they are verifying, are free of their red list. And so when I was talking about the chemicals of concern, here they kind of give you, what is a red list? And it has different tiers. But for finding that right product, this may be a good place to go to determine what is a product. And this is not just hair, what is a product that's good for you? It's also supporting minority-owned businesses so that we change the landscape.
Okay, that looks good. Thank you so much for putting us on first. I'm going to check that out myself as someone who has probably a whole entire room dedicated to just products. That is a wonderful thing. So thank you. So for our next question, someone is asking, what would be the products that are best for facial discolorations, I guess, to get an even skin tone?
So the concerns about those products is that we worry that some of them have lead, metals, which are carcinogenic. So it's actually not a good idea to use products that are to even skin tone, which is also a code for skin lightening creams. And so these are products that are likely to have EDCs, metal, lead, etc. Now I understand that this is something that, it's an individual choice. So I am not here to tell you that you are not allowed or you should not use a certain product. What I am here to say is that if this is a product that you truly believe in, that you really want to use, see if you can find a safer alternative. And then if the safer alternative is still not 100% safe, make sure you're limiting your exposure. So maybe look, when you look at the number of ingredients, if the ingredients are listed in the most abundant, so try to look at a product and make sure that ingredient that is unsafe is not the most abundant within that list.
Okay.
So for some products you just don't want to give up, but there's some products where you can find a safe alternative.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So we have another really good question. So nail salons. Miss Serena is asking. She notices when she goes to the nail salon, the technicians are always wearing masks. Is there any current data about going to the nail salon and our health?
Yes. So there's been studies on nail salon workers and their health, but remember, they're chronically, occupationally exposed on a regular basis. And so it is definitely recommended that they have the mask, but also that the conditions and the products that they use are safer. Now, there is concern about women who are going to this the nail salon, that that's just another exposure. So not necessarily saying that those who frequent nail salons have an increased risk of X. It's not an occupational exposure, right? But for nail salon workers, that is an occupational consistent exposure. For the general population who go to the nail salon, it's about a cumulative chronic exposure. And adding that exposure that you're experiencing at the nail salon, the smell, inhalation, what's put onto your nails, the nail polish used, and how frequently you do that, plus your other personal care routine.
Okay, thank you. We also, while we're speaking, Mrs. Johnson is asking, can we show the slide with the list of harmful chemicals?
So I once again say go to the red list, because my chemicals were just a snapshot of the types of chemicals. But for example, let me take you through, and also I think this will be recorded so you'll be able to see it. But this is the chemicals of concern. I would say if you go to safecosmetics.org red list, they actually have all the chemicals that I mentioned plus. So even the 66 chemicals that I mentioned that Silent Spring Institute have measured in Black beauty products, they will have these listed here. And so pretty much they have tier 1 through tier 3, where tier 3 is the least concerned. These are more allergens and irritants, where tier 1 is of like severe concern. And so if you can use their user guide, but here's what I was showing. This is what you may be talking about. Like this was a snapshot of their red list, but you can also go to the specific, if you want to know what a chemical does. And they'll also be providing like little pictorials to say, you know, what is ethyl acetate and what does it do, where is it, and what are the health effects? And you can find that within the red list as well.
Great, great. So I know you spoke in depth about the darker hair dye, but is there anything we should be aware of about, bleaching your hair or lightening your hair? Can you speak to that?
Yes, so all hair dyes definitely have formulations that have endocrine disruptor chemicals. What we did was compare the darker hair dye to the lighter hair dye, suggesting, or to no hair dye. So suggesting that, no hair dye is the safest, whereas darker hair dye has been associated with like the true risk. Now, it's not advisable. I mean, for the most part, when you're pregnant, they say don't dye your hair at all because the chemicals that are in those products are harmful to you and the fetus. So I would suggest that, given that it is harmful in general and it does have EDC, whether it's light hair dye or dark hair dye, it's not suggested. But the darker hair dyes have been explicitly linked to breast cancer risk. And I can also just say that, there's not 5,000 studies that do this. Like there's a Finnish cohort, there is the sister study that doesn't include a high proportion of Black women. There's the Women's Circle of Health study that I showed you that showed the evidence. But in general, there's not a lot of large studies with a large population of minority individuals to study this. But of the studies that we have seen, hair dyes are not safe.
Okay, perfect. And then we also, what about, I know we have some studies, with Black women, but are there any studies for Asian women, Asian American women, Latinas?
Mm-hmm. And so the environmental and justice beauty conceptual framework includes all persons of color. And so one of the biggest things that Amizota's work has shown, who is an environmental justice researcher, is that, there's products that are more frequently used by certain demographics than others. From what I can recall, for cosmetics, Latina populations have the largest buying power. I think for skincare products, Asian populations, and all of these ingredients, these EDCs are present in those as well. So there is a push to do more, and also to not be so defining by sex, but also considering gender. So femme identifying, but also masculine identifying, because these products are also among men. So I would say that studies are needed. I think most of the studies I've seen have been occupationally based, which may drive some of the associations we're seeing, for example, in the Asian population, like in California. They've done some salon-based. And then there's been a Latina adolescent study in California called Hermosa. So there are more studies that are including greater diversity. I'm working on a national study called the Connect Cohort, which is going to be asking these questions across the United States to get more diversity, because we do need to ask these questions to understand greater exposures by women of color and their health outcomes. But unfortunately, the data is not as prevalent.
Okay, yes, great, thank you. I have another question. I get this question all the time because I do outreach. People are asking about deodorants. You know a lot about deodorant. We also get the talcum powder question. What can you speak about those? Is deodorant safe? Is it not safe?
I would say you want to use a clean deodorant. You just want to use a deodorant that is less EDCs. And when it comes to the talc, that concern is raised from the incredible, egregious Johnson & Johnson and the baby powder. And I would say, and that's because it had very harmful carcinogenic ingredients. So I personally do stay away from talc, but I also say this: I stink in the summer. Like, I need a real deodorant. And so I also think about, my exposure as it relates to my entire personal care routine. So in the summer, if I'm going to be at a festival, I know I need a real deodorant. That doesn't mean that I'm using that real deodorant every single day. Some days I can use my sister's suggestion of the crystal deodorant. Sometimes I can use no deodorant, but I weigh my exposure based off of my personal experiences. And so I wanted to say, you want to limit, you want to reduce. I am not saying some people have gone to, I'm never wearing makeup or I'm never using deodorant. It's up to you how you want to move. But I would say move in a way that fits you, that still makes you feel comfortable, but also reduces your exposure. You make that call. Because I would never tell somebody you have a sweating problem and I say, you just stink. I would never say that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So getting into, you mentioned makeup. We do have a question or so about makeup. One of the most popular brands of makeup is MAC. Is it safe? Is it not safe? No. Okay. That was great. Right to the point. Okay. And along with that question, someone is asking, after they have had chemo, they notice they have very dark circles under their eyes and their eyelashes have fallen out, some of their eyebrows have fallen out. Do you recommend anything for them, a natural way for them to try to solve this issue that they're having?
I would say, even with MAC, I can't suggest MAC has a fiery gold color that I really love. So I'm not saying don't use any MAC, but I'm just saying I wouldn't just only use MAC. I would be discerning. And when it comes to products, like there are things that are going to impact you that really makes you feel less. And you need to feel good about yourself. When it comes to what can grow back hair, I'm not an expert whatsoever. But I would say there are products out there where, for example, there's different safer eyebrow sculpting products where you can kind of fill it in. There's definitely safe cosmetics there. When it comes to eyelashes, I know there's probably like safe, like if you wanted to add something, like there's probably safer products to attach, to enhance and to modify. So it's really, the risk benefit ratio. If you don't feel good about yourself, you are not going to take care of yourself. So don't sacrifice taking care of yourself. Just imagine, are there other safer ways I can still feel beautiful without giving myself these exposures? Or is there a way I can still feel beautiful, but I don't really need that fiery gold color every day? I can find a substitute. So feel beautiful, feel powerful, but also just think about how you can do that in the most safest, humane way for your health.
Right, great answer. Well, Dr. McDonald, thank you so much. Thank you for everything. The slides were wonderful. The presentation was everything was absolutely wonderful. Thank you all in the audience as well for submitting all of your questions. Make sure you check out our upcoming educational programs. We also will have this on the website in about a few days. So anyone who did not have a chance to watch will be able to watch. Please also take a moment to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. Remember, all the surveys are completely anonymous. And this includes the webinar. Thank you again, Dr. McDonald. Thank you again to the audience. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.